Hey, it's Jason, and I'm handing it over to my content partner, Eric Brandstetter, for a special series with Chrissy Manwaring at Robertson Marketing called Psychology of Swag.
Welcome to the Psychology of Swag, a special series here on Working Forward. I'm Eric Brandstetter, and in this series, we're diving deep into why branded merchandise works and why most of it doesn't. Today's episode might make you look around your office differently. We're talking about attachment. Why do you still have that one branded mug from a conference 5 years ago, but you threw away everything else? Why does your team treasure certain gifts while others gather dust? Joining me is Chrissy Manwaring from Robertson Marketing. Chrissy, you work with some of the biggest companies in the world, and you spent decades studying what makes people keep things. Help us understand the neuroscience a little bit. When someone receives a branded item, what's happening in the brain?
So there are so many things that are happening in that moment, and it's hard to comprehend on some level because things are happening physically, things are happening chemically. You're triggering all of these different sensations. I geek out over this and understanding the science, but I'm going to tell you straight up, you're going to need to go to some experts to dive deep into all the 8 chemicals that are firing in your brain for something easily accessible. I do recommend Neuroscience for Leadership by Tara Stewart, Kitty Chisholm, and Paul Brown. But the application that I put into it on the promo side is that it's the emotion that makes the memory stick. So when we can get that emotional trigger to activate at the time that you're connecting with a physical object, you have increased its stickiness exponentially. So think about all the different neurons that are firing when you're engaging with something tactily versus just digitally on screen. You've got your sense of touch involved. You've got your sense of smell involved. Have you ever picked up a leather item and held it up to your face and smelled it? We're human beings, and our body is the most incredible information gathering instrument ever created. And so when we are engaging with a physical object, we're able to trigger more of those neurons, get them firing together, get them engaging together. And if you have created a sense of curiosity or excitement in association with this gifting moment, then you've got these hormones and the neurochemistry involved, and all of this fires together to make an incredible connection in the brain and the body and connect it to the brand through the object.
When you have an emotional experience, you tend to remember that. There's a memory of that. So when I hear you talk about neuroscience and emotions, what my simple brain does is, oh, I'm going to remember this. I'm going to remember how it feels. I'm going to remember the event. That's a deep ingrained part of me from now until the end. So that emotion leads to memories.
And that's what we're intentionally creating. People will think at first that gifting is about the actual intrinsic value of the artifact or the object. That people are going to get excited about receiving this because it's a brand name speaker or a brand name headphone or a brand name jacket. But think for a second about what gives those brand names their value. It's the sentiment. It is the brand equity that they've built over time. You want to brand with a Nike polo and add your logo to it because people already have all of these emotional associations to Nike, and that's how the brands build their equity. So when you think about what you're going to brand with your logo, that's what you're building as well. You're creating those emotional associations and relationships and building on that relationship over time.
Yeah, Chrissy, you talk about the forces that determine whether something becomes a favorite, and I'm using kind of air quotes favorite here. What are some of those forces and how can we think about those?
Well, the ultimate goal is you want to create something that the end user will keep and use and appreciate. And in order to do that, it has to hit, that utility, first of all. Is it something they can actually use? Is it something that they want? Does it solve a real problem in their life? I mean, we're human beings. We need to stay hydrated. This is why drinkware is so ubiquitous. Think of how many pieces of drinkware you touch in your average day. And you have a water bottle, you have a coffee mug, you might have, a soda later on in the day, or a glass of wine in the evening, or a cocktail with friends. And so that becomes something that is very often branded because of the utility and the frequency of use. But you also, in order to make it impactful as a promotional product, does it also have any emotional connection to the person, either from the brand moment or the experience? For a hiker that has works to go see all of the national parks and has picked up the national park bottle and has taken that through all of those experience. Now you're laying emotion on top of utility because you have connection and frequency of use. So the important thing there is, does this, the utility of the item, does it have the capacity to be a favorite? A cheap plastic bottle that cracks and falls apart or that leaks at the rim, yeah, it can carry water, but is it going to make you happy when you go to drink out of it and it splashes water all over your face or it leaks in your bag? No. And so you're gotta think through this. Does this artifact have the capacity to be somebody's favorite water bottle or favorite coffee mug or favorite glass for wine in the evenings? But also think about the identity component of this. And so you're layering on associations with the artifact itself, and if it has a brand name and an identity of its own. So, for example, is this an Elemental bottle or a Stanley or a Brewmate or a Yeti? Are we going to pull in all of those identity and emotional associations as well as the brand name of the company that's imprinting it? Or are we going to go completely custom? And are we going to do something that has the quality and utility of a retail brand, but that is solely branded for your company and your recipients? So the last component of this is actually the branding itself. And are we hitting on the identity of the user? So for example, you mentioned coffee mugs earlier. And I remember getting my father a mug for Christmas. He and my mother enjoy cacao every morning, and we enjoy verbal puns. And I remember getting these two mugs, and one said, I came prepared for a battle of wits, but you seem to be disarmed. And another one that says, I can't be responsible for what my face does when you're talking. And these are such silly things, but it ties in emotionally to this moment in our relationship. And when I look into their cupboards at the mugs that they've kept, for 20 or 30 years, I look at it. Oh my goodness, it seems so silly. But NPR is something that we all enjoy as a family, which kind of makes sense. There's a circularity to me being on a podcast now because I love storytelling with people that, are masters of their craft, and I learn so much for them. So being donors to NPR matters. And so when I open up that cupboard, the gift with sponsorship or the gift with financial support, that means something to them and their identity. And so those earn a long time place in the cabinet. And in return for that, every time you get your morning cup of coffee, you're not consciously thinking about, man, I should go donate to NPR. But what you are thinking of is, man, I contributed to something incredible. I'm a piece of that. I'm a part of that. And so when the reminder comes to re-up your support or your donation, it's an easy decision to make because for 365 days of that year, you've had a subconscious trigger in your memory by the proximity of that artifact in your environment, reinforcing the good feelings of having been a donor in the past.
That's so good. That's so good. How important is it that when we're thinking about swag and merchandise, I kind of glossed over the word favorite, but is it the key? Is one of the keys that it has to be able to become a favorite of
Yes.
whoever the user is? Okay.
Yes. I mean, that is one of the most important considerations when you're making the decision to spend your budget on product. If it doesn't have the capacity to become the favorite pen, don't buy it. I mean, a cheap writing instrument is immediate brand fill. It's immediately going to get thrown away. On the flip side, I remember going to the bank with my mom and they were giving out a nice, I think it was a big rollerball pen. And that was the one she signed all of her checks with. And of course, as kids, we thought that was the coolest pen. So we would steal it from her purse to go and write something. And she would miss it. Okay. She's like, who stole my pen? And it's the pen that you write until it's out of ink because it's your favorite. And so you have favorites across every commodity category in your home. You have a favorite t-shirt. You have a favorite sweatshirt. You have a favorite umbrella. You have a favorite coffee mug. And you have your favorite pen. And so when you think about all of those, they're hitting that utility element in somebody's life. They're hitting that functionality environment. Right? But there's also an emotional attachment because it is your favorite. And you do remember who gave you your favorite pen because you ask for it when your kids walk away with it. Who stole my, whatever brand name pen, whether it's from the bank or your insurance carrier or anything else. And on the flip side, if you're the one distributing the cheap pen that you go to write with it and the roller bar stops working, You look at it and then you throw it away. And the association is cheap crap. Throw it away. And is that the brand impression you want to make?
I mean, there might even be frustration from the pen, and you look down and you see the name. So there's this immediate association.
And it's the emotion that you're going for. And so it has to have the capacity to be the favorite. And that applies across the entire spectrum of the category. So it doesn't have to be a multi-$100 item to be somebody's favorite. It just needs to be the best quality or have the best branding or the best messaging. I did see, this incredible campaign that a company did with their pens on making connections. And so it was actually the artwork they would put on the pen. And I remember it just had these little hearts on one end and a circle, but kind of a connection like a plane in flight, the dot that we use sometimes to represent that, going to the heart on the other end. And it just, the novelty of it, people thought it was so cute. And so making it your favorite, both with the way you connect with the individual's identity, the example of the donor, or the way they connect with the identity of the company with the message that's actually put on it that they want to be a part of. And I'll use a retail example. I don't think that they'll care too much on this. But if you think about Nike's Just Do It, that they put that message on their t-shirts, they put that message on their hats, they put their slogan. But if you're a Nike fan, if that matters to you, you wear it because you want the halo effect of the product, all of those things. But it's that message, that just do it, that I internalize as part of my identity. It makes me want to be part of that I then in turn am expressing when I wear that garment. And in my sphere of influence, when I go to the gym and all my peers see me, they're now making that association.
What about physical objects versus digital experiences? Does one have a stronger neuroscience pull to us?
Yes, and it's because of that sensory engagement. I mean, there's some amazing research done by the Danish physicist Tors Noratander that has to do with the bandwidth of the senses. And if you think about how much information we are collecting every second of every day through the physical instrumentality of our body, it is mind-blowing. And so he has this really powerful graphic that they've created. And he tried to make it accessible to us in our day and age by equating the bandwidth of the various senses into megabytes, because we're kind of used to processing data and we know how quickly data moves through those different devices. And so when you think of how much visual data your body is absorbing every second of every day through your visual cortex, when you're seeing something, these digital experiences, they are a visual feast. And so they give you a lot of content. The data on that is about 1,250 megabytes per second. So think about that, the processing power of your computer network. That's how much data is coming through your visual senses constantly. And so what you're seeing, the light from the room, the car driving past your window, you're seeing all of this, but you're also seeing every object on your physical environment. What's on your desk, what people around you are wearing. All of these objects are registering visually. You're just not paying attention to them yet. But the information is there. If I'm doing a speech from a center stage, I can tell people at this point, how many yellow blazers are in the room. And the one person that's wearing a yellow blazer, they know they're wearing it. But every head in the room will turn towards that person. Their body already knows that exists in the room, and that's where they are. That physical knowledge is there because they're visually collecting it. They're just not processing it consciously until that recall is triggered. But the data is there and being constantly processed. Also, think about how much data you're absorbing through your sense of touch every single moment. You know the temperature and the humidity of the room in which you're sitting. You know where the seam on your sock is. You know so much information, but you're not consciously consuming this, right? It's all happening in the background until the room gets too hot or until the room gets too cold. And then you start to do something about it because it causes discomfort physically. Think about the finishing touches that go into an environment. Think about the texture of the chair or the desk pad. And all of this information is coming at us through our sense of touch. And so the objects that we engage with are firing Not only our sensory receptors within our hands and our feet and our skin, but also within our brain. And so when we're engaging with a physical object, when you pick up that mug, you feel the texture, you feel the weight, you're feeling this with your body. And that's firing more neuroconnectors, it's making more connections. The processing power of your sense of touch every second is about 125 megabytes per second of data that's passing through that sensory receptor network. So the next two senses, smell and hearing, are about equal. So when we talk about digital experiences, right now you're listening to this, you're consuming this content, and maybe you're doing it as you're walking or you're driving, and you're simultaneously receiving information about cars driving by or a dog barking or an alarm going off or the microwave beeping. All of this data is coming at us constantly. And our subconscious is searching for those triggers of what's important and what matters. And we filter a lot of this out, but that's still about 12.5 megabytes of data that's coming through our system constantly, through our sense of smell, through our sense of touch. And smell is very evocative. There is no sense more powerful in triggering memories and pulling us back to an exact moment than our sense of smell. And most of that is because it is so subconscious. It takes a lot for our sense of smell to stop us in our tracks and make what we're smelling the most important thing. That is very powerful at doing that. This is why natural gas that is odorless is fragranced with a scent that you cannot ignore that. You will stop and you will take action. But think also about the powerful sense of returning home and the smells of cooking and the smells of nostalgia that you're layering on a lifetime of meaning with a fragrance. And you can experiment with this in your branding a little bit. Hotels do this all the time. I can give you entire data on the top 10 hotel brands and the fragrances they use and why, and when they tweak them regionally or use them identically, so that when you walk in, you immediately have that sense of home that they're experimenting with in their environments. And last is your sense of taste that you're bringing in. It's not a ton of data, mostly because it's trained out of us. But if you ever have an experience with an infant or a very young child, they put everything in their mouths because they get so much information. They learn so much from that. And their mouth, you've got all the flavors you're experiencing, but also your tongue is so sensitive as a touch as well. When you can start to play with taste and flavor, the brand power is incredibly impactful. But with all of this information that's coming at us from all of our senses every second of every day, we're only aware of a small fraction of that. Maybe 0.3 to 0.7% is in our conscious awareness. But our physical body, our exquisite information gathering device, is collecting all of that all the time.
Fascinating. So the touch then being the number one, right? That was the 1250 megabytes or so.
Vision. And that's why there is impact in digital advertising. There is impact in visual stimulation. But for the enduring impact, you need to trigger the physical senses. You need to either use that visual to trigger an emotional response that will give us the physicality and anchor that memory, or you need to give us something physical to interact with.
Yes, that makes total sense. Is there a difference between if we choose something versus if we're gifted something? Is there any neuroscience behind that? Because I'm thinking through, this idea of merch, and if I'm able to choose something, does that make it more likely to be my favorite? Or is it that gifting, sometimes you receive that and you have that memory of the gifting process? Is there a difference?
It goes both ways. And so there's different times and different experiences that you're going to want to choose to go one direction versus another. I will say the most powerful is going to be, giving a gift of choice. Because when something is ours, we value it more than if it's not. So there was a project we were working on with a company that wanted to give everybody this mug, and they were so excited about this mug. And it was a brand name, very expensive $40 mug that when people visited their facility, they would hand them the mug. So when you give this to me, you've triggered a whole bunch of emotions, right? If I want it, then I'm excited and I'm enthusiastic and it's going to do all the things that you're hoping for. But if I flew in there and I only have my backpack with me, you've now created a problem for me. I can't get this home. And so instead of triggering excitement and energy, I'm now feeling anxiety and guilt and a little bit of resentment. And I don't know what to do with it. I don't want to hurt your feelings. So I don't want to shove it back at you because I'm afraid of being offensive. And so I take it, but I take it now with guilt and resentment. And then I actually dump it in the hotel room and leave it there. And I remember having a conversation with somebody and they're like, no, but these are so expensive. Nobody would leave it behind. I mean, they would at least take it home for their kids. I'm like, go talk to the hotel. And they found out the ratio of these that were either getting donated or just thrown away by the hotel because it's a problem they don't want to deal with either. And so it's something that's so easily remedied by offering it to them or offering to ship it to them later. And then it's the surprise and delight is back. It's like, oh my gosh, that's so generous. But if you give them the option to gracefully opt out, one, you're saving your money because you didn't give them something they don't want that's not going to achieve, the purpose of the promotion to begin with. But you've also given them the opportunity to then choose and to claim it and to make it theirs. And once it has that sense of ownership associated, there's been a lot of fascinating studies about the value of items and how people value items when they think it's theirs versus when it's not. And things that are ours always have greater value than things that belong to others.
What about, since you live in this world so much, is there an item that you've kept over the years that you keep coming back to that's your favorite? And why has it survived your own decluttering processes?
So I do think about this a lot. And there are artifacts, the one that I became consciously aware of as having the longest longevity with me goes back to some of those artifacts from school days. And I mean, everybody, I think, keeps a college t-shirt or a sorority. I'm sorry, this is going to date me, but in my generation, we all got the boxers that we slept in and that we wore to the gym and that we used forever and that you wear until they literally fall apart. But then you still keep it in your drawer because of the memories that it evokes. Long after its utility has expired, the sentimentality keeps it in our sphere. And objects really, they acquire their value through sentiment, through the emotion. And we're all familiar with the phrase of sentimental value. And sometimes it's used mockingly because, going through somebody's home when they're moving and everything has sentimental value and it's really hard to get rid of. But those are the forces that are so powerful in human experience. And you want to intentionally engage the mechanisms of giving objects that value and creating that brand connection and that affiliation with individual identity and company artifact.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we actually met at a conference and very vivid memory of me talking to you and you're like, hey, Eric, you should have these mints. These mints are pretty cool. So I go back and I go to my little booth that I'm at, right? And I sit down, I open up the mints and they're the shape of your logo. And I thought, well, that's really neat. So I had a couple of mints and of course they're probably the best mints that I've ever had. So I bring them home and I show my kids and I show my wife. I literally showed them mints from a conference because I said, check out these mints. Isn't this cool? So when you and I were having conversations to prepare for the recording today, I told my wife, like, oh, I'm meeting with the mint lady. And she got super excited. So I don't know that we're going to finish any of those mints that you gave us because there is this like novelty and it's an experience to open up the package and to look at the mint and it has a really cool logo and a cool shape. But she literally is like, oh, you're speaking with the mint lady. How cool is that? So it's funny how little things that we don't even necessarily, at least I wouldn't put a bunch of time, attention, my thought process towards, how it makes a big difference. And now my kids are talking about the dog mints and my wife's talking about the dog mints and I'm talking about dog mints in a podcast recording now.
See, this is one of those examples of a little tiny item that hits every single sense. You have the sense of taste. And I think you nailed it. When we manufacture the mints, it has to be the most delicious tasting mints. And that can be kind of divisive. And so honestly, if I'm making a mint for a European audience, I'm going to skew more towards the really curiously strong type of mint that's going to be more equitable to say an Altoid that is really strong because that's what appeals to that audience. But in the US, we use more of I don't even know how to describe it, but it is the most delicious mint that you can have. But then we also, we tweak the shape. We make it novel when you experience it on your tongue. It's a visual experience, but it's also a tactile one. And because we've hit all of those senses and the novelty of it, I've earned a place in your backpack that you didn't throw it away instantly. I can hit the price point of a pen with something that's consumable, that's something that's going to trigger that sense of taste, that sense of memory, and it expands influence. And so there's a reason that mints are trade show staples for me. Most people will appreciate having one after a meal, but there's 50 to 100 mints in a tin, depending on the shape and the size we give it. How many brand impressions is that? And I love hearing that you actually shared it with your wife and kids. That is so fun.
Yeah, and they think it's so fun too.
I will say there was one guest that I had at an event in Las Vegas that I gave a tin of those mints to. And 2 weeks later, I get a photograph, and she is on the subway. She lives in London, and she has the mints in her hand. And she's taking one out, and she's taking a picture of it. She's like, "Still carrying you with me." Weeks later, I'm going to be so bummed when this tin of mints is gone.
Yeah, and that's why we're probably not going to finish ours. So we have that lasting, like it's going to stay in our pantry for a long time and keep having conversations centered around it, which I never would have expected going into the conference. That's for sure. Now, tell me about a client where you help them to think through and maybe rethink their merchandising strategy. I think there was something that has to do with backpacks and physical therapy. Is that right?
This one was just from earlier this year, and this was such a fun event to watch unfold. But we have a client that they're very much a disruptor in the technology for the physical therapy environment. And so traditionally, when you go into a physical therapist, you've ever recovered from a sports injury or a surgery, you're trying to measure progress. And so they take these measurements every time you come in. And it can take about 20 minutes to get all of these physical measurements so you can measure progress. And so they've created this amazing technology that they can use AI to collect these measurements, either asynchronously and have your patient collect the measurements before they even enter your office so that your time together, maybe doing the physical verification. But there's all of this amazing things this technology does. But adoption is hard with individuals that are not AI native. And so they were talking about this big trade show they had coming up, and they came to us to get promotional products for their event, and they had previously as well. And so we tend to consult with them and learn about what exactly it is they're trying to do. And so obviously in this situation, they're trying to increase user adoption and awareness of their product. And so we ask about the audience mix, who's at the event. And so they have, career professionals, and they have a huge body of students that come to this event. And so we started talking about the fact that, well, students are AI native. This is much easier adoption for them. So how can we increase awareness and engagement with this audience at this specific trade show? So then you go into the deep dive of student life and what matters to students. And so right now with this rising generation, sustainability is incredibly important. So when I start thinking now about, you take all this information and then you start trying to find the artifact that aligns with that. And there's a brand of backpacks manufactured by Cotopaxi. And their environmental impact story is just incredibly powerful. And it's, getting more and more traction with this younger generation that this is natively inherently important to them. And so, okay, now I have my artifact, now I have my audience. How do we marry this up to get the most impact for our client at their show? So we know that students are well connected with each other, that you typically know all the other students at your school. So instead of just gifting them to everybody, they're very expensive bags. I will say that up front. And so we ended up gifting one Cotopaxi backpack every hour of the conference. And to get the backpack, the students, they come by the booth, they would see the backpacks hanging there. Oh my gosh, how do I get one? They would ask for it. We could offer it, but they would ask for it as well. And we had a sign there with a QR code. Scan this QR code, like us on Instagram, comment on this post, and we'll get in the drawing for the backpack. And then every hour we'd spin the wheel on their app for badge retrieval, contact retrieval for the show. And then they would reach back out on Instagram by replying to that person's post. Congratulations, you won the backpack. So everything's happening in real time on social media. But this accomplished multiple goals for them because they wanted to connect with the students. They wanted to increase visibility on campus. Students carrying the backpack is a highly visible artifact. You can see it on them. They're now embodying the brand with something that's part of their identity. showing their social consciousness and their brand affiliation with an impact program. So we give away the first backpack. The guy gets the text. When he comes back, he brought 20 people with him. I am not exaggerating. I am not joking, but all of those students want the backpack. The beautiful thing about this is in real time, they could watch their follower count grow on Instagram, their engagement, and think about how social media works. So then when they picked up the backpack, you take a picture of them with the backpack in the booth, you now post that to social media. They like it, they follow it, and now you're amplifying your growth across that. And by giving the backpacks to the students, we now have something really fun happening where the first guy is now wearing the backpack around the show floor. So then we have more students coming back, and then we have other people that aren't students, but that are also fans of the brand coming in and having those conversations. And so that's the power. It was only 17 bags, but the direct ROI and the attribution of the information gathering and the impact of that is now measurable, but it keeps growing. And it's understanding what the goals of the client are really matters when we're making product recommendations.
That's fascinating. And I'm thinking through our own merch, at People Forward Network, and how are we strategically and thoughtfully approaching branded merchandise and swag and all of that. So it's super helpful for me. And in fact, let's think that we're a leader now. So speaking directly to the leaders, it's a Monday morning or it's a Friday afternoon, and you're trying to figure out whether your merch has the ability, the potential to be a favorite. How can I think about that? What are some quick takeaways, some actionable takeaways for leaders that are listening right now and trying to turn what you're saying into action for them?
Just be intentional. If you are, and this is going to depend on what your job function is and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're an HR leader or an executive and you're trying to lead a change management effort within your organization, think through your lived experience. What do you do every day? And how can we connect with people in the moment of decision to help influence this behavior? And think through some of those artifacts. I would do a swag audit. I would go through your organization in whatever function in which you're performing and saying, okay, how are we showing up for recruiting, for onboarding, for years of service and recognition? If you're in sales, how are we thinking about the customer life cycle from first touch, either at an event or a cold outreach, all the way through the customer onboarding experience and the relationship building elements? Are you celebrating the anniversary of your business relationship? Are you acknowledging the milestones you hit through the customer engagement relationship? And for those prospecting tools that you send out, how are we celebrating our salespeople's success? How are we acknowledging the milestones we're hitting as an organization and the employee contribution to those milestones? And really thinking through that, what evidence are we giving to our people that they matter to us? Because that evidence is that physical brand ambassador that's going to live with them in their home, in their environment, and keep those messages relevant.
Yeah. So for anybody that's about to order merch, are there 2 or 3 questions that they need to ask themselves before they hit the purchase button?
Yeah. Does this have the capacity to be a favorite? And I also encourage people to think about, where is the ultimate destination for this artifact? Is it going to be disposable or is it going to be enduring? And does this product have the capacity to endure? Where will it live in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And if it's disposable, if it's not going to live that long, what does end of life look like? So for that favorite pen that you ran out of ink, is it compostable, recyclable? Or is it ultimately still going to be brand fill?
So, Chrissy, I know you built out a resource library with a bunch of information with the neuroscience and psychology of strategic merchandise. Where can people go to learn more?
We are building this resource at promobyguide.com. And it is not a sales site, it's an information site. So if you're looking for more information on making better buying decisions, head over to the promobyguide.com.
promobyguide.com. We'll put that in the show notes. Chrissy, thank you. Next week, we're going to talk about why most merch fails, that $6 billion waste problem.
Thanks for tuning in to this special episode of Working Forward. Want to be part of future conversations like this one? Join us inside our PFN community at bit.ly/PFN community, where the future of work is happening now. See you there.